Hey, campfire crew, let's get it on. The Poachers, submitted by Stacy Lynn. One of the things I've always loved about our farm is how quiet it gets at night. During the day, it's loud as hell. The equipment humming, the loud noise of trucks moving all over the place, and of course my dad barking orders to my brothers and the farmhands. But once the sun drops, everything seems to just settle, and the land stretches out into this huge dark ocean. The only sounds then are insects and the occasional rustle of something moving through the fields. That quiet used to be super peaceful to me. Now it isn't that way. My name's Stacy, and I was 17 when all this happened. We've got more land than we can fully work. Fields, sure, but we also have big patches of woods and overgrown brush and old unused acreage my dad says belongs to the deer more than us. And that's where the problem begins. It's not the deer, it's what the deer bring. The poachers. It all started a few weeks before everything went really bad. And at first it was just distant gunshots at night. Not super unusual out here, people hunt. But something about the timing was off. It was always too late, and it was always too frequent. And yeah, the biggest problem? It was definitely out of season. My dad noticed before anybody else. One morning while we were having breakfast, he kind of pushed his plate away to the side and I could tell he was angry. "Those assholes are shooting on our land," he said. "I found a carcass back by the south woods. They just left it there." And that pissed him off more than anything else. The waste. I think all hunters are like that. Nobody wants to see any animals wasted. My dad was a true blue, respectful hunter. We all were. But killing something and leaving it to rot? Yeah, that's not hunting. That's something else. So, he and the farmhands started doing rounds in the evenings just to check things out. My older brothers Jake and Nolan went with him sometimes, carrying shotguns more for intimidation than anything else. And every now and then they'd come back saying that they saw headlights cutting through the back acreage, or heard trucks tearing off when they got closer to them. One evening they got back into the house and my brother looked at me and said, "Those guys are getting pretty bold." And my dad said, "Yeah, they're going to get caught." All I could think of was, yeah, but they hadn't been caught yet. The first time I saw them, I was out running our dogs. We've got 3. Duke, a big German shepherd, Rosie, a mutt with more attitude than sense, and Bear, who's exactly what he sounds like. He's another mutt, but he is massive and he is protective. The kind of dog you feel safe with walking in the dark. I like taking them out just before sunset. That was kind of my time. No brothers, no chores, just me, my music in one ear, and the dogs running wild along the edges of the fields. That evening felt normal at first. The sky was turning that soft orange-pink, and the soybeans swayed like waves. The dogs were ahead of me, chasing each other near the tree line. And then Duke stopped. He didn't bark right away. He just froze with his ears up and stared into the woods. I remember calling out, "Duke?" And then Rosie started growling low in her throat, and then Bear moved closer to me without taking his eyes off the trees. And then I heard the footsteps crunching. I could tell they weren't deer. They were way too heavy. I pulled my earbud out and called out, "Hello?" trying to sound braver than I felt. And for a few seconds nothing happened. Then there was more noise, and 3 men stepped out from the trees. They were not dressed like hunters. They weren't wearing any bright orange. They weren't wearing any hunting gear at all. Just dark clothes, boots, and rifles slung like they didn't give a shit who saw them. My stomach dropped. I knew right away who these guys were. "Well, look what we got here," one of them said. He had a thick beard and this slow, ugly grin. I tightened my grip on Bear's collar and said, "You guys are on private property." One of the other guys looked at me and said, "Yeah, looks like a lot of property." That's when my dogs started barking then, really loud and aggressive. Duke moved forward with his teeth bared, and I let him. I wanted them to look scary. I really needed them to. You guys need to leave, I said. My dad's nearby and the police already know about you guys. Well, that was a lie. But it worked a little because they exchanged looks. But the Beardo guy said, yeah, your dad ain't here. He will be, I said. And if I don't come back in about 5 minutes, he will be calling the cops. That's when Rosie lunged forward, snapping, and one of the guys actually flinched. For some reason, that gave me just enough courage to stand my ground. Get off our land, I said slowly. And for a second, I thought they might push it. The way they kind of looked at me, they weren't just annoyed. This was something colder, like they were deciding something. Then the third guy, who hadn't said much, jerked his head towards the woods and said, guys, it's not worth it. Beardo spat chewing tobacco on the ground and said, yeah, we'll be seeing you. And honestly, that made my skin crawl. But they backed up, disappeared into the trees the same way they came. I didn't wait around. I turned and started walking, fast at first, and then broke into a full run back towards the house, the dogs all staying tight around me. My dad lost his shit when I told him. Not at me, at those guys. They approached you, he said. And I remember his face getting red in that way. I usually saw him when he got mad, but this was even redder. Dad, they didn't touch me, but they were jerks. Jake slammed his hand on the table and said, all right, that's it, I'm going out there right now. And my dad stopped him and said, son, not in the dark. Then he looked at me and got a little bit softer, but he was still serious and said, Stace, you're not going out there alone again. Not until this is handled, you understand? And I nodded even though I hated it. I wasn't some helpless kid, and I really didn't want to give up my night walks with the dogs. But at the same time, I couldn't shake the way those guys had looked at me. Especially when that one said, we'll be seeing you. The next day I woke up and the farm was running as usual. But something felt weird. I thought about the night before, and it was the first night in a long time that we hadn't heard any gunshots or seen any headlights. That should have been a good thing, meaning those guys had gotten scared off. But for some reason, it made me feel worse, like that calm before a storm. When the evening wrapped up, I just let my dogs run around in the yard and then went inside. Jake and Nolan kept looking outside like they were expecting something to be standing in our back floodlights. And I just tried to act normal. I went into the living room and watched TV and started painting my nails. But I kept thinking about the woods and about those guys, and I knew for sure the rest of my family was thinking the same thing. It was just after midnight when the dogs started barking, and not their usual bark when they saw deer or raccoons. These were loud, violent, and non-stop barks. I shot up in bed and then I heard it. A thud, like something hitting the side of the house. I screamed out, "Dad!" and grabbed for a hoodie that I'd left on the floor. Then I heard more noise outside, footsteps on the gravel, and low voices. Didn't take a genius to figure out that, somebody's outside. I ran into the hallway just as my dad was coming out of his room, already holding his shotgun. Jake and Nolan weren't far behind, both of them holding theirs. "Stay behind us," my dad said. But I was already moving towards the front window, and I peeked through the curtain. There were 3 figures on our porch. The same 3 guys. One of them was messing with the door handle. "They're trying to get in," I whispered. Yeah, genius me. No kidding, Stacy. Of course they're trying to get in. My dad didn't hesitate 1 second. He stepped forward, flung open the door, and racked the shotgun loud enough that it echoed through the entire house. "Get the hell off my property," he said, and the men froze. For a split second, everything was still. Then the bearded one smirked again like he didn't even care. "Hey, neighbor, we just wanted to talk." "At midnight, you got about 3 seconds to turn and get your ugly asses off this fucking porch," my dad said. Something like that. I don't have a photographic memory, but you get the idea. Jake and Nolan stepped up beside him with their guns raised. Me and my mom, we were in the house, picking up the phone and dialing 911. I whispered into the phone as the operator answered about the poachers at the house and that they were trying to break in. My mom grabbed the phone from me and took over, and I looked out the window onto the porch. I saw one of the men take a step forward, and Bear lunged past my dad, barking like the monster that he could be, and that finally broke whatever confidence these guys had left in them. "Get your fucking dog out of here," one of them shouted. My dad said, "You first," stood steady as a stone. For a second, I thought these guys might actually try something, like they'd raise their rifles to my dog or something, and I almost screamed. But instead, the quiet guy grabbed Beardo's arm and said, "Dude, the cops are coming." And that did it. They backed away slowly at first and then turned and ran down the driveway. We could hear a truck engine roar to life, and then heard it take off down the driveway. The police showed up about 10 minutes later. It felt like it was hours later. We gave them everything, descriptions, what happened in the field, what happened that night. And my voice was shaking at first talking to them, but I forced myself to stay steady. I wasn't going to let those clowns scare me into silence. One of the things that bothered me more than anything, though, was that they weren't intimidated by my dad and my brothers with their guns. I look back now and laugh that they were terrified of good old Bear. I miss that dog. He passed away last year. Anyway, it turns out these guys had been hitting other properties too. Hunting illegally, trespassing, and we weren't the only landowners they had threatened. They just hadn't been caught yet. That was until 2 nights later when the sheriff came back to talk to us and said, "We got your boys, they're in custody. You're not going to be seeing them again." And I let out a breath I didn't realize that for whatever reason felt like I'd been holding for days. Things went back to normal after that, or as normal as they could. The fields are still there and the woods are there too, and we're all doing the same things we've always done day in and day out. It's farm life. For the most part, it's peaceful. But sometimes when I take my dogs out for a walk, sans Bear, I am getting a new puppy in a month, I still catch myself staring at the tree line, wondering if someone else will ever step out of there like those other guys did. I can only hope that it doesn't happen again. Scumbag Farmhand, submitted by Big Bad Brad. I've told this story a handful of times over the years, and every time I do, I still feel that same knot tighten in my chest. It was 1989, and hot as hell down in southern Alabama, and I thought I knew every inch of my land and every guy who worked on it. It turns out I didn't know either as well as I thought. I ran about 200 acres back then, all kinds of stuff. Corn, soy, small herd of cattle even. My oldest boy, Daniel, worked alongside me, who was a strong kid. Very quiet, but one of the most dependable people I've ever had in my life. And then there were some of my hands. Earl had been with me the longest, going on 8 years, and we trusted him like family. He never gave us a reason not to. That summer, I hired a new guy, Curtis. He came recommended by my friend Joel, a farmer I'd known most of my life, and my dad knew him as well. He told me that Curtis was a really hard worker, but was looking for work. When he showed up, he looked the part. He was lean and mean, sunburned, but he was soft-spoken. He kept his eyes down a lot, and he didn't really talk unless spoken to. If I'm being honest, when I first met him, something about him rubbed me the wrong way. I couldn't put my finger on it, it was just a feeling. But I ignored it. Work was work, and we needed the help. My daughter, Susie, was 16 that year. Super bright kid. She was a very bright kid, always sketching or painting something. Old barns, the tree lines, the way the light hit the fields at sunset. She was very talented, the apple of my eye, and had more talent in her finger than I did in my entire body. I was and am still very proud of her. Her room was on the first floor of the farmhouse, the window facing out toward the patch of woods that bordered our land. And the first time she brought something up, I didn't really think much of it. We were having dinner one night, and she was just pushing her food around her plate when she said, "Dad, I think someone was outside my window last night." I looked at her and said, "What do you mean?" And she said, "Well, I saw a flash, like a camera or something." My son Daniel, being the smartass that he was, just snorted and said, "Probably lightning bugs, stupid." But she shook her head and said, "No, this was bright and quick, like someone was taking a picture." I told her it was probably nothing, probably just an electrical storm, and kids do imagine things. But I told her I would check outside before she went to bed that night. I walked the perimeter with a flashlight, didn't see anything, reported to her, and she went to bed. But the next afternoon, she caught me as I was running in the house for something. "I heard something last night this time, Dad. Right outside the window, like someone was walking around out there." For some reason, this got my attention more so than the night before. I took it seriously, and I put up heavy curtains in her room and nailed the window shut just to be safe. Once again, I checked out the entire perimeter before she went to bed, and I even sent Daniel out to set up a motion light. Still, there was nothing. But Susie, she just kept getting worse. She started sleeping with her light on and felt like she was being watched all the time, even during the day. One afternoon while I was in our big barn, she came running in and was as pale as I'd ever seen her. She was breathing heavily, saying, "I was painting by the tree line, and I heard someone behind me. When I turned around, Daddy, I saw something move in the woods, like someone ducking behind a tree." I sat and looked at her and then asked, "Did you see who it was?" And she said, "No, but I know someone was there." Finally, she calmed down, and we had dinner as a family. But that night, the phone calls started. Of course, we had a landline. Nobody had cell phones back then. We all relied on landlines. The good old days, you know. We had an extension in the kitchen, another in our upstairs hallway, and one in my bedroom. And the phone rang close to midnight, so I answered it. At first, all I heard was breathing, and then a creepy voice say, "Put her back in the window." I felt my blood run cold and said, "Who the hell is this?" But the line went dead. Over the next week, the calls kept coming. Sometimes just breathing, sometimes worse, and sometimes saying things that I don't need to repeat here about my daughter. And it was always late at night. And that's when my suspicion locked onto Curtis. I mean, he was the outsider, right? He was the unknown. He kept to himself, sometimes too much, I thought. And there was something in the way he looked at the ground when Susie passed by. Like he was hiding something. I called Joel, the one who recommended him. I said, "You sure about this guy?" He just replied, "As far as I know, yeah, why?" I didn't tell him everything, but I told him enough. But he swore that Curtis had never given him any trouble and was an excellent worker. I will say that. Curtis was a good worker, but something else was making my gut say otherwise. I started watching Curtis very closely. I mean, I was noticing every little thing that he did. The way he disappeared for stretches of time. The way he kept avoiding eye contact. And I even checked his bunk in the equipment shed when he was out working. Maybe I shouldn't have done that, but I did. I didn't find anything. No camera, no pictures, nothing weird, nothing out of the ordinary. But still, the feeling wouldn't leave me. Meanwhile, Susie's fear kept growing, and one night she screamed so loud it seemed like it shook the house. My wife and I ran to her room, and she was backed up against the wall, pointing at the window. She screamed out, "I heard him! He was right there! I heard him scratching the glass!" I flung the door open and ran outside barefoot. Daniel was right behind me. My wife was consoling Susie. The motion light came on, washing the yard in that harsh yellow light. The woods beyond it looked as black as a void. For a second, I thought I saw something move along the edge of the tree line, but then it was gone. That was the night I decided enough is enough, and maybe I was a little too half-cocked, but I went in and told Curtis that he was done. He looked genuinely confused, saying, "Sir, what did I do?" I didn't explain. I just told him to pack his shit up and be out of there by morning. He just nodded slowly, but I could tell he was hurt. He didn't argue anything. For a moment, and just a moment, I felt a flicker of a doubt, but it didn't last. I'd made my decision. The next day went without incident, and we didn't get any phone calls that night. There were no sounds outside my daughter's window, and I told myself, yeah, you'd been right all along. But not too long later, everything blew up. Susie had gone out just before dusk to feed the chickens. It was a short walk from the house past a stretch of corn that had grown high that year, tall enough to swallow a person whole. She should have been back in 10 minutes, and when 20 passed, I felt a knot in my stomach again. I tapped my son on the shoulder and said, "Danny, grab the flashlight, let's go." We headed out toward the coop, calling out Susie's name. And that's when I heard something that I will never forget to this day. My daughter's scream. Not just fear, this was pure terror, and it was coming from the cornfield. Daniel and I took off, and I never forgot the sound of those stalks slapping against us as we pushed through. When you plant corn right, you plant it tight. Invisibility gives you nothing, just walls of green and the fading light bleeding out of the sky. I saw a movement ahead, and it was a figure, a tall, masked figure, grappling with Susie. She was fighting like hell, kicking and screaming and clawing at this guy. I got closer to him and yelled, "Hey, let her go!" The man did let go of her, and then bolted deeper into the field. Daniel stayed with Emily while I gave chase. I wasn't thinking. I didn't hesitate. I was just running. I could hear the guy crashing ahead of me and breathing hard, and I said, "Buddy, the hell you're getting away." Daniel joined my chase a second later. We split up, cutting him off from both sides. The guy stumbled, tripped over a ridge, and went down hard, and I was on his ass in an instant. We struggled in the dirt, and he was fighting like an animal, but between me and Daniel, we finally overpowered him, and I pulled the ski mask off his head. My whole world tilted. It was Earl. 8 years. 8 years this guy had worked beside me, ate at my table, prayed with my family, laughed with my family. And all that time, he was nothing more than a scumbag. This was not the guy I thought I knew. We dragged his ass out of the corn and called the sheriff, and they took him away right away. What they found afterward, I still have trouble thinking about. Hidden in his stuff were photographs, dozens of them, and not just of Susie, though there were plenty of those. There were other girls, too. Young girls, unaware girls, some obviously taken through windows and others from a distance. This scumbag had been doing it for years. The phone calls? Earl. The stalking of my daughter? Earl. Poor Curtis had been innocent all along. And about Curtis, I tracked him down about a week later and apologized the best I could. I asked him to come back, and he didn't say much, just nodded, accepted my apology, but said he was going on his own way, and I'll blame him for not coming back. Susie eventually recovered from what she'd been through, as much as anyone can. She had a hell of a scare. I moved her room upstairs and got rid of the old window altogether. And as for me, I learned something the hard way. You think you know people. You think time equals trust. But sometimes, the danger isn't the stranger who makes you uneasy. Sometimes it's the guy you've already let in. And it's the mistakes that you don't get to take back that bother you the most. I guess the moral of the story is, don't judge a book by its cover, Uncle Jay. Thanks for reading my story if you do. Scariest Moment in My Life, submitted by Travis. I've worked my family farm my whole life, and up until 2013, if you'd asked me what scared me the most out there, I would have said storms. Lightning splitting trees in half and wind ripping tin off the barn roof, that kind of thing. I never thought the quiet could be worse, and I never thought something as ordinary as a tractor could turn into something that would nearly kill me. This happened in late October of that year. Just as the sun was dropping behind the tree line, my parents took off to visit my aunt, and my grandparents were the only other family we had around. They lived about 20 minutes away. I was by myself and finishing up a last pass on the field farthest from the home base of our barn and home. The tractor I was using was older than me. My dad called it old reliable. It rattled like it had bones instead of bolts. But it did get the job done, which is why we kept it around. The field I was out in was uneven in spots, especially near the edges where the woods started creeping in. I'd driven that area 100 times. I knew every dip and rise, or at least I thought I did. I remember the sky turning that dull purple color, the kind that makes everything feel a little weird. The tractor was droning on underneath me, steady but loud, and vibrating up through the seat and into my spine. I was halfway through a turn when it happened. The front tire hit something solid, and it wasn't just like a bump, it was more like a dead stop. There was a loud, sharp crack, and I was airborne. I don't even remember letting go of the wheel. 1 second I was gripping it, and the next I was looking at the sky spinning above me. I hit the ground hard on my back, and all the air blasted out of my lungs in one violent gasp that never came back. I couldn't breathe. Those of you who have had the wind knocked out of you know exactly what I'm talking about. This I do remember clearly, the panic of trying to suck in air and getting nothing. When you get the wind knocked out of you, your chest locks up and your throat spasms a bit. I was clawing at the dirt, eyes wide, and seeing nothing but stars in the dim dying light overhead. Then my head hit. I must have bounced or rolled because the next thing I knew, everything went gray and distant, like I was underwater. Everything sounded dull and the world just seemed to be off kilter. I don't know how long I was out, but what woke me was the sound of the tractor. At first, it didn't make any sense. I could hear that steady, grinding noise, but somehow it was different and wrong. But then I noticed it was getting louder. It was moving. It seemed to be getting closer. My vision started to come back in pieces. I was seeing blurred shapes and the outline of the field, and then the tractor. It took me a second to understand what I was seeing. I could see the tractor moving, not just rolling forward. It was turning. The wheel must have gotten jerked and stuck when I was thrown, because the tractor was tracing a slow, uneven circle. Obviously, there was no one on it. No one was steering it. It was just this old machine grinding along on its own, carving a crooked loop through the dirt, and I was inside that loop. The realization hit me all at once, like ice water dumping on my head. My chest finally spasmed enough that I could pull in a ragged breath, and pain exploded through me. My back, my head, everything hurt. But the tractor was coming back around. I tried to sit up and nearly blacked out. I remember everything feeling like it was swaying and my ears were ringing. The engine noise of the tractor was growing louder and louder, like a dog growling getting closer to me. Then I could feel the ground trembling faintly underneath me. And I remember thinking, this is it. This is how it happens. This is how I die. I rolled onto my side, gasping and dragging in shallow breaths that barely did anything. My limbs felt heavy and slow, like they didn't even belong to me, and I could see the tractor now, clearer. Big old thing, rusted and unstoppable. The front tire was angled just enough to keep it looping. And on this pass, it was lined up with me. I tried crawling, but my arms were buckling underneath me, and my head was throbbing so hard I was blurring my vision again. All I could hear and focus on was the sound of that tractor engine. It kept getting closer and closer, and what seemed like the last second, something in me snapped awake. Maybe it was adrenaline, maybe it was just pure panic, or maybe pure survival. I threw my weight to the side and rolled hard, not even aiming, just trying to get out of the way. One of the big tires hit my leg, and I felt it before I heard anything. It was this massive pressure, like my bones turning to glass under something impossibly heavy. And then the pain came, white hot and blinding, ripping a scream out of me that I didn't even recognize as my own voice. And then the tractor rolled past. I lay there, shaking and trying to grab my leg, trying not to pass out. I could feel my leg. It just felt wrong, like it was bent in a way that it shouldn't be, and every movement of my body sent shocks of agony through me. The tractor kept going, still circling, still coming back towards me. And the worst part wasn't the pain. It was knowing that this wasn't over. For some reason, I said a quick prayer and I forced myself to move. I dug my fingers and hands and arms into the dirt and just started pulling, with my broken leg dragging uselessly behind me. Every inch made me want to throw up, and I didn't look back. I didn't want to see how close the tractor was getting again. I just kept crawling. The edge of the circle felt miles away, but finally I crossed it, and then I collapsed there for a moment, knowing that the tractor, even if it did come back, would miss me by that time. But I knew I couldn't lay out there. I was all alone, and if I passed out, that was probably it. The farmhouse was about a half-mile away, and half a mile away might as well have been a friggin' marathon. I kept crawling. It took forever. I dragged myself a few feet and stopped to breathe, fight off the darkness creeping into my vision, and then do it all over again. The sky went from purple to black, and every sound out there, the wind, the distant creak of things in the barn, everything felt amplified, like something was watching me struggle through the dirt. To be honest, I don't remember most of it, just bits and pieces of things. I do remember my hands bleeding, and my throat was raw from screaming for help, and that constant fear that I'd hear the tractor behind me again. I kept playing out this terrible nightmare that it suddenly would straighten out and come right at me, but of course it didn't. When I finally looked up and saw our back porch light, I almost thought I was hallucinating it. But then the door opened. My salvation, my grandma and grandpa, were there stopping by just to visit. My grandma came out first, and I tried to call out to her, but nothing really came out. But thankfully she saw me. She screamed, and both of them ran over as best they could right to me. And that's one thing that does stick with me, the look on their faces of shock and fear. My grandpa dropped to his knees in the dirt, and for the first time since all of this started, I finally felt like I wasn't going to die alone out there. They got me to the side of our house, called for help, and an ambulance came. My parents were notified as well, but they were closer to the hospital and just met me there. I did make a full recovery. By the way, we got rid of the tractor after that. My dad finally called it quits. The creepiest thing, though, is sometimes when I'm sitting on the back porch after a hard day's work having a beer, and I hear an engine fire up somewhere else on the farm, I think about that old tractor, still circling in my mind. Hearing Ghosts in Old Farmhouses by Sybil. In the 1970s, my urban middle-class French-Canadian parents decided to buy an old farmhouse in a remote rural area of Quebec, about an hour from Victoriaville, where I was born. We lived there until I was 6 years old, until my parents split up and we moved to Montreal. I don't remember this, but my mother says that as soon as I could speak, I told her about the voices I heard in my bedroom where I played alone. She says I would run down the stairs on a regular basis and ask her what certain words meant. She said the words were often archaic, sacrilegious words, and that only happened when we were alone in the house. After we moved back to the city, my father kept the house as a weekend and summer retreat, so I could continue spending a considerable amount of time there, but I never really personally experienced anything later on. However, my father's second wife's sister and her husband borrowed the house for a weekend, and they were having marital issues. They reported hearing someone climb the stairs slowly and clearly in the silence one night. They both woke up and heard it, and since the master bedroom door is situated right where the stairs end, they armed themselves with bedside lamps and were ready to attack the intruder as it reached the top. But the steps stopped suddenly as they started. The couple never divorced, but they refused to return to that house. I now have 2 daughters who are 10 and 13 years old. Their father grew up in an old farmhouse in Ontario, about 70 kilometers east of Toronto. When I met him 20 years ago, the farmhouse was already used as a summer house because his parents lived in Florida. We also usually celebrate Christmas there because it's a very large place. The house has a lot of character, with high ceilings, 2 flights of stairs, windows everywhere, and a beautiful fireplace. I was told the house was built in 1837, with an extension built in 1910. When my eldest daughter was 2.5 years old, we went there to celebrate Christmas, although we lived in Toronto. The house was packed with family members, so our small daughter slept with us in her father's old bedroom. It's in the old part of the house where the rooms are spacious and the ceilings are high. There are 2 large windows in there, and it could have been used as a master bedroom in the past, although there was another room just as large as this one across the hall, used by his parents. The day before Christmas, my daughter woke up from her afternoon nap, and her grandmother and I were sitting with her on the bed when she asked, "Why is there an old lady sitting on the chair watching me sleep?" The chair was in one of the corners of the room, facing the bed on the left. Her grandmother looked very surprised and just removed the chair and placed it in the dining room instead. She said nobody ever had the unusual experiences in the house. My daughter forgot, but, like my mother before me, I didn't. The girl's father and I split up in 2009. 2 years ago, I lost most of my child support and was having financial problems while trying to complete a graduate degree. The grandparents offered that the girls and I move into the farmhouse, which wasn't too far from the city and the university. I was reluctant at first because they are very difficult people. It seems like this would be a very kind thing to do, and maybe it is. But if you knew them, you would understand how they think, and how they just really want to control me and the girls. I won't go into that too much here, but they aren't very pleasant people to be around, to say the least. They have money and use it to bully people. But in spite of this, I did accept their offer in the end because they own 2 properties in Florida, and I thought that since they barely ever went to that house, I wouldn't have to put up with them too often. The girls were familiar with the place, and the house was well kept, large, and comfortable. Naturally, I had to use their son's old room since he was estranged from them, and the other rooms were occasionally used by them or their daughter. My children naturally moved into the room that was already theirs with bunk beds and everything. My bedroom was the one where my daughter had seen a ghost as a toddler, and I always slept with the lights on. I also did multiple sage burning cleansing all over the house where I asked for only positive energy to remain, and to please not be scared by the spirits. We lived there happily for over a year. By then, the grandparents and aunt had started showing up every other month and trying to treat us like their maids. Things were escalating. Our life turned into a modern Cinderella story. I had to drive to the airport to pick them up. I had to cook for them and then clean up after them. They were verbally abusive to me and the children. They asked my girls to do things that were too hard for them physically, and I knew that I needed to move out as soon as school ended, but I didn't want to uproot the children in the middle of the year. In November of 2014, the grandmother told me over the phone that they intended to spend an entire month at the farm at Christmas instead of the usual 5 or 6 days. That was more than I could bear. I don't want to sound ungrateful, but I had a very bad feeling about things. I rationalized about it and took the decision that I just had to get through it since it was their house. That's when I started hearing a voice waking me up at 5:55 in the morning, every morning. It was very soft but clear. It sounded like a "hey." It was coming from a feminine voice right over my face. You see, not only do I not hear voices, but I have a perfect internal clock and wake up every morning naturally at 7 without the help of an alarm clock. I ignored it the first time, but like I said, it happened again and again. On the 3rd or 4th morning it happened, I became a little worried and told my mother about it over the phone. I'm a pretty open-minded person, but numerology never seemed very credible to me. However, that seemed like the only way to try to understand this, so I searched online about the meaning of 555. The first thing I found was that it meant that something unexpected was about to happen. And then, as I was just looking around on the internet, I saw that in some Asian cultures it means, "get out now." After I saw that online, I continued waking up to the voice at 5:55, but only one day out of 2 or 3. I was really trying to ignore it. But I did feel really worried when I started hearing the voice at night as I was drifting asleep too. At some point, my children only had 1 day left of school before the holidays, and my mother convinced me to pack up and come over for a visit. I wrote an email to the grandparents and told them that I needed to spend some time with my mother and would return on December 23 to celebrate Christmas with them. This still gave us over 2 weeks together, and I assumed that they'd like to have their house back to see their Canadian friends. I was very polite. Well, as I was on the road halfway to my mother's, I received the nastiest, most violent email from all of them. They insulted me in every way possible and told me that they'd talked about it already and had already agreed. That is, the grandmother, the grandfather, and the sister, that they were going to throw us out and that I was never to return to the house. Just because I decided to go visit my mother instead of waiting on them? I honestly tried to make peace and begged them to consider the well-being of their grandchildren who were in the middle of a school year. They had friends they didn't want to miss, but that only seemed to fuel their violence towards me. So I stopped, and they never went back on their decision or apologized for anything. They actually shipped all of our belongings to my mother's house a week later through a moving company. I think that it is possible that my ability to hear ghosts as a child came back when I was in a different haunted farmhouse. While being thrown out on the streets a week before Christmas with my children was very unpleasant, I can't help but thinking that I was probably better off at my mother's, and that it was possible that someone or something was trying to warn us that we were about to be treated poorly, especially since the grandparents admitted having already decided to throw us out. Well, if that Ontario farmhouse is haunted, I truly feel sorry for the ghosts who have to stay there with those evil, evil people, especially during the summer and Christmas months. I wish the ghosts luck living with them. Hey gang, thanks for listening to this episode. If you have a true scary story of any nature that you'd like me to narrate, email it to unclejosh.truescarystories@gmail.com. I read them all. If you're catching this on YouTube and you like what you heard and saw, why not give the video a thumbs up, share it with a friend, leave a comment. I'd love to know what you thought of the stories. It's all free and it all helps out with the algorithms, so I appreciate it. Follow me on social media, and if you'd like to take your support a step further, find a link to my Patreon page in the description and consider getting some Uncle Josh and Campfire Crew merchandise. A link to my TeePublic storefront is also in the description. Everyone, be excellent to each other, and until next time, be wary of things that go bump in the night. It could be anything: a ghost, a monster, or the guy next door.